Hi there. Are you somebody who has developed problems with headaches or tremors or other neurologic problems, loss of equilibrium, trouble regulating blood pressure, chronic fatigue syndrome? Have you found anything like this in your house? I really hope you haven't. But if you have, and you would like to know if mold might be a problem in your health, then you've come to the right place today. That's what this video is about. Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Matthews. I'm a board-certified chiropractic neurologist, and today we're here to talk about mold, mycotoxins, and how it affects your health. Now, this is a huge subject, and I'm only going to touch on it, so there's a lot more than what I'm going to be able to cover here today, so just so you know that. These are all examples of mold, and some people will call it mildew. Mildew is mold. It's all mold. And unless you actually do a culture of the organism itself, it's very hard for the layperson to know, is that a dangerous mold or is it not? Really, it should be safe to assume that any of these are likely very dangerous. Now, most people don't realize that molds have toxins that can be so potent that it's thought they've actually been used as biowarfare agents in the past. The test that I use is the test offered by Vibrant Wellness. I do not work for Vibrant Wellness. I'm not invested in Vibrant Wellness, but I do use their lab tests. And for full disclosure, I am a functional practitioner who does Zoom and telemedicine. So I may have an interest in people using this test because I offer this test. However, I'm using it because I feel it is the best test available. So let's zoom in and take a look at this. Mycotoxins are, of course, toxins produced by molds. There are so many different symptoms from mycotoxins that it is really quite challenging for most of us, even practitioners sometimes, to identify, oh, that's a symptom from a mycotoxin. I mean, look at the symptoms: fatigue, weakness, burning in the throat, skin rashes, depression or anxiety, hearing loss, headaches, irregular heartbeat, palpitations in some cases, muscle weakness, vision changes, abdominal pain and bloating. There's just so many different ones. I can tell you that in my practice, one of the things that we see sometimes that is a clue, it's of course not diagnostic, but sometimes it leads us towards doing these tests. And that's simply the timing of your symptoms. In other words, if a person's doing fairly well, and then they go to the basement to do a little cleaning, and the next 2 days are absolutely wiped out, can't sleep, anxiety, heart palpitations, yeah, it's something in the basement. What else is different? What changed? And of course, basements are often where molds and mycotoxins grow, although they can, as you saw in the pictures, grow on windowsills and a lot of places. So mycotoxins can also come from things you eat, dietary. Dietary sources can be spoiled food or environmental sources inside buildings, and where the air, the dust in your home with mold in it can actually end up on your food if you leave food out. Or you may even have mold growing inside your refrigerator if you haven't cleaned it really well in a while. Essentially, if you take everything out of your fridge and you see anything in there that doesn't look like white plastic or stainless or whatever the finish of your refrigerator is, suspect that it could be mold. Now, symptoms, as I said earlier, really, really challenging to pick apart because they're symptoms that can happen in so many other conditions. Very often, for example, all of those symptoms can happen from Lyme disease, beyond just the swollen, painful joints that are the short-term type of symptoms. Now, people that live or work in older buildings, water-damaged buildings, if your basement is ever flooded, this is highly suspect. If you have firewood in your basement and your basement flooded and you didn't burn or get rid of all of the firewood that had gotten wet, you probably got mold in there. A lot of these things happen and people don't realize they're happening. If you put clothes or leather items in your basement and they get moldy, you have mold in your basement. It isn't coming there on the leather. Now, molds can produce a variety of different toxins, and this is a list of the toxins that the Vibrant Mycotoxin test tests for. And to be clear, the mycotoxin test is looking for the toxin produced by the mold, not necessarily the mold itself, but these are really, really specific items. The last patient that I got one of these test results on had this particular one, and that's a very, very serious toxin. When we look more at the adverse events, here's a little research paper in Journal of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. They're saying that damp, moldy indoor conditions can cause respiratory problems like asthma, wheezing, rhinosinusitis, stuffy nose, basically. Stachybotrys, which is what produces this particular toxin over here, isosatrettoxin, that is produced by Stachybotrys. They produce trichothecines and other mycotoxins. They inhibit protein synthesis. They can cause hemorrhaging disorders. They can alter immune factors, change how your immune system works, that alter brain flow, autonomic nerve function, brain waves, and affect concentration, worsen concentration, attention, balance, and memory. That's a lot of different things. Here is a sample test report from Vibrant Wellness that shows, if you ran this test, what it would look like, or, the format, not necessarily the results. And their tests typically show the test name, what is the toxin, the species of organism that produces that toxin, or at least the genus in the case of penicillin. And then what is an in control, a moderate, or a high level of that toxin. And here we see in this example, this sample person had high levels of these two toxins, moderate levels of these, and acceptable levels of these other ones. So that's always how the mycotoxin test is structured. And then below, there will be an informational section for anything that was positive, which is really, really useful. And you can see Roridin is another one that's produced by Stachybotrys. It's another trichothecene. And these are involved in what's called sick building syndrome. Now, if you Google sick building syndrome, you'll find it's a syndrome, and many of the articles about it say we don't know why, but sometimes there are buildings that make everybody sick, or quite a few people in them sick. We call that sick building syndrome. Really, it's because of air quality and things like mold. I mean, what else could it be, right? It could be chemistry maybe put out by the building materials themselves. As an example of that, if you think back to the big hurricane that happened in Louisiana, we lived in the South at that time, and FEMA sent a huge number of mobile home trailers, just basic trailers, down to Arkansas to help with housing. And because of government red tape and the fact that Katrina had destroyed the roads, so they couldn't bring the trailers down to Louisiana because some of the roads didn't exist right then, those trailers ended up sitting, and the particle board and associated materials inside outgassed so much toxic chemical that then the government could not let people use them because they're poisonous inside, because they had sat in the southern sun all summer with all the windows closed. That would be an example of sick building syndrome if somebody actually tried to live in it. But very often it's because of the microbiome of the building, let's say, in this case, molds, mycotoxins. Here's a list from Vibrant Wellness also of mycotoxins and the species that produce them, which is useful when you find one of these positive, and an intervention guide, which is on Vibrant Wellness's website also. Now, this intervention guide's actually pretty good. When you look at it, it has a good explanation of what are mycotoxins, what the harmful effects are. That covers a lot of the things that I just said, actually. And then it covers some strategies, and we're going to go over some of these strategies. The basic strategy, besides not being exposed to it, in other words, don't do whatever it is that's getting you exposed, is to work on increasing the excretion. Excretion means how your body gets rid of it. And there are several different things. These in general are called binders, and then liver antioxidant support. Mycotoxins deplete your body of glutathione. And glutathione is an antioxidant that is your body's primary antioxidant. It protects you from something called oxidative stress. And you really don't want your body to be depleted of glutathione and get oxidative stress, because one of the first places it affects is your brain. And that's where you get brain fog and potentially dementia, or at least short-term dementia, where your brain just really doesn't seem to want to work normally, and you might feel perpetually hungover or something. Fungal overgrowth concerns. Sometimes these fungal organisms can actually grow in the person, in the lungs, in the breathing passages. It's creepy stuff, but you can have pathogens like this actually growing inside your body. And you may need to use some anti-candida products. There's some examples here. Then other ways of detoxing include saunas and exercise and changes to the diet. And this chart even includes some advice on how to mitigate mold in your house. Now, I'm going to jump out here and say, if your place looks like one of these, above all that one, you probably are going to need professional mitigation, because you're going to be breathing this stuff in if you try to clean it yourself. And you may not even have access to the chemistry required to kill it without poisoning yourself on top of having a mold issue. So if it's that bad, you just don't want to be in that room. Leave that to the professionals. But there are a variety of fungal products that you can, anti-fungal products and strategies, improving airflow, improving indoor air quality, using HEPA filters in fans and air circulation fans can help. You can put HEPA filters in the forced air systems of, if you have that in your house for heat and air conditioning, although it will reduce the airflow and it may or may not work very well depending on how your system is built. It may not be approved for that much air pressure, because the HEPA filters would put a lot more restriction on the airflow. Antifungal products, bleach, hydrogen peroxide. There are a lot of these that have been used traditionally. Some of them are actually, these guys are in some ways, a little bit controversial now, because there is some evidence that they may not work as well as we thought. And for example, bleach may seem like it killed the mold, but put it in a protective state where it becomes a powder that is easy to aerosolize as spores and actually helps it spread later. I'm not a chemist. I'm not somebody that goes that far into the science. I'm just telling you what I've read in research studies and articles by people who seem to know more about it than I do. Essential oils are also a very good strategy. And interestingly, tea tree oil is one of the best. And you can use a diffuser with those. So we'll get back to that in a moment. Let's talk just a little bit about some of the toxins. Trichothecenes. This is produced by various species, including Stachybotrys, which is the one that I found the other day. These are super, super toxic, and they're often known to produce health problems in building occupants. If you want to know more about the actual chemistry, that's there. I took organic chemistry. It was not my favorite course, but I did pass it. These work by killing cells and inhibiting how your RNA and your DNA actually works. And we know so much about it down to that cellular and DNA level that is quite incredible. Protein synthesis is really what makes life work and makes what your mitochondria are work. Mitochondria are what produce all the energy for everything that your body does and your brain does. If your mitochondria get poisoned by molds, you will have some version of chronic fatigue. The symptoms of this can be variable. If it's an acute poisoning, of course, that symptom can be stomach and intestinal in nature, but the secondary stage of it affects your white blood cells and affects the skin. It can make somebody stop breathing, and it can even kill you. So these are more of the acute high-level exposure symptoms, like if you tried to clean that nasty-looking house yourself without proper equipment. Now, mold toxins are actually, they were first discovered in bread, and it's been more of an ongoing issue in the livestock and veterinary business because some of these molds grow on feed, on grains, and on hay. So here's an example of a research article in the journal Toxins about trichothecenes in cereal grains. And there's quite a bit of information in here about it. It does go into, livestock exposure. Yeah, livestock exposure to mycotoxins, which occurs at all production phases through the consumption of contaminated cereal grains. More chemistry. Yeah, chemistry. What this comes down to is, as a functional practitioner and as somebody who tries to avoid mold toxins, it's safer to really be on a grain-free diet. Cereal grains, you can Google this and have fun with it or not, but grains are harvested from farms in very vast quantities. And one of the only reasons that they don't spoil is that they're fumigated, sometimes with gases that may be inert and prevent the fungi and bacteria and whatnot from eating them, and sometimes with actual fungicides to try to preserve the stuff. That's a mixed thing. I think it's probably less dangerous than if it got moldy and a huge number of people ate it, because if you read through this article, you'll see historic examples when that happened, and it was quite tragic. However, I'm not really comfortable eating the toxins that killed the mold either. Here's another website from one of the labs that does testing of buildings. And they talk about growth areas, how to prevent mold growth, and different toxins that are produced. There's quite a bit of information out there about it, but a lot of people don't realize quite how serious this stuff is. Even Wikipedia has a decent page on what Stachybotrys is, for example, and sick building syndrome. There you go, sick building syndrome, a condition in which people in a building suffer from symptoms of illness or become infected with chronic disease from the building. Now, sometimes these things happen. For example, it's quite common in Maine. And part of the reason is that when you look at the weather, Maine summers are not hot enough for everybody to use air conditioning. In fact, most people don't use air conditioning in at least northern Maine, where I lived for a while. And that results in a lot more humidity because air conditioning dries the air quite a bit. And if you don't use air conditioning, you're going to get more mold. Ironically, in the South, where it gets hot and just as humid, you would think that would be better conditions for mold, but everybody uses air conditioning like all the time except for winter. And as a result, as long as the air conditioning is working properly, there's less incidence of mold. It's a bit counterintuitive until you look at it that way. Here's another article in APS.NET about Stachybotrys. And this is an article written by a mycologist, and he talks about some of the damages in North Dakota from flooded homes, what the actual fungus is, what it looks like under a microscope. And it will, he goes into a lot of details about how it functions and the history of the problem. In Ukraine and Europe, Eastern Europe during the 30s, there were outbreaks in horses and other animals that was tracked back to straw that was contaminated. Lots of good reading there. And here's another article in the International Journal of Food and Microbiology. And this looks at these trichothecines in maize, which is corn, wheat, and rice. Again, if you're fighting with mold toxicity and you find you have mycotoxins, my advice is to be on a grain-free diet. Mold and mycotoxins effects on the neurologic and immune system in humans. Another research study. And you could just look at the table of contents here. This is some pretty serious stuff. Antibody formation, cross-reactivity of antibodies to molds, changes in immune function, natural killer cells, neurologic abnormalities, neurocognitive deficits. Neurocognitive deficit is a spooky thing. If you lose your memory and you really can't concentrate and can't think, you really can't function. And for most of us, you really couldn't work. So one strategy that is useful is to go on a low mold, low salicylate diet. Now, just to be clear, this is assuming that you're doing whatever you have to do to not be breathing in mold and living with mold. That may mean paying a company to completely go through your house and remove everything that's moldy. It may be just selling your house, getting rid of your house and getting a new one. Maybe you need to move to Arizona or move to Florida, someplace where air conditioning gets used a lot more if you're in a state where it doesn't. But you have to eliminate your exposure to mold. You can't climb a mountain if you keep digging holes. You have to get rid of the exposure. But once it's in your system, you have to get rid of exposures in food, and you have to stop eating foods that might feed the molds that are in your system already in your body. This is a decent article here about mold-containing foods, which is quite a few things, and additionally foods that feed molds, like high-sugar foods. Sugar, high sugar and processed foods, this stuff's pretty much just poison. You should just avoid it. But some of these that would seem otherwise healthy, pineapple, melon, citrus, they have a high probability of developing mold. Honeydew melon and cantaloupe are two of the most common. And you can often see mold growing on the outside of those. Some types of coffee can contain mold spores. And if anything else, washing and peeling fruits and vegetables that grow on the ground is important because molds are in the soil. Here are some foods that can be eaten. Of course, organic pastured animal meats and poultry and wild-caught fish, non-starchy vegetables, low-sugar fruits, raw nuts and seeds, except for peanuts, which are high in aflatoxin, which is a mycotoxin, healthy fats. This article says small amounts of gluten-free grains, if tolerated. My advice, she says some self-experimentation to determine if you can tolerate any grains. If you're honestly sick from this, you probably want to just eliminate the grains and try to get well as quickly as you can. Now, you can include foods that are anti-fungal, and that would be things like garlic, onions, propolis, which is bee pollen, and raw honey. That's the exception to the no sugar rule. Coconut oil and some other coconut products. Also, some people become cross-reactive with salicylates if they have molds, and you may want to eliminate salicylates. There are a lot of foods that have salicylates. The right column here is very high, and the left column is negligible. And salicylates in fruits. Bananas are negligible. Apricots are very high. Now, when we talk about binding, how to help your body get rid of the accumulated mold toxins. So a lot of the getting rid of happens through the bowel, through bowel movements. And this is an article here about bentonite and zeolite. Bentonite is clay. It's a type of clay. This article is about pigs and cows, but bentonite is used for humans also. Here's a great article by Jasmine Brown. She's a naturopath and an MS. And it's a super article about binders. Binders to bind up the mycotoxin so your body can get rid of it, so you can poop it out, essentially. There is one drug, cholestyramine, which is used sometimes for that. Some of these work better for one toxin than another. Charcoal, activated charcoal, can actually be used for binding mycotoxins, although again, it works better at some than others. It works really well for what are known as macrocytic trichothecenes. Clay, which is bentonite clay, also zeolite, these bind up toxins and help you excrete them. And then there's a water-soluble polysaccharide, glucomannan. In general, fiber might, but the contradiction here is that a lot of the fiber comes from grains, which may have molds in them. And if you're gluten sensitive, grains are probably a good thing to avoid also. Chlorella can also help. Humic acid and fulvic acid, those are actually in soil and they help detoxify soil, but it helps bind up biotoxins. And you'll see humic acid in some of the products that are used for this. And of course, probiotics, because your good, happy, beneficial gut microbiome also helps to bind mycotoxins and help get rid of them. Saccharomyces cerevisiae binds tightly to aflatoxins, for example. And Saccharomyces boulardii, which is that's a supplement, a probiotic supplement that's great for short-term gut problems. We use that a lot. And she has a wonderful chart here at the end that'll help you. If you do a mycotoxin test and you see what toxins you have, you can see which binders might work best. Super article. Here's an article in National Library of Medicine in the journal Toxins about how mycotoxins deplete glutathione. And I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I will link them in the description section so you have them as a resource. The Iranian Journal of Public Health had a great article about bentonite clay as a natural remedy. And this is shared so that you can see the entire article, which is really kind of useful compared to only having access to the abstract introduction. Cholestyramine uses. This is just a pharmacy site that I found online. But it talks about biotoxins, bile absorption. When you look at biotoxins, some of those are molds. And a published article in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology about controlling indoor fungal contamination using essential oils. Now, I link this article. I like this article, and I'm linking it in the description. I link this article because this article describes which oils work better on which molds. So, for example, tea tree oil was one of the best because tea tree oil was the only one that had total growth inhibition in all 6 isolates, which works. That's pretty good. One of these, for example, what's that? A commercial mold inhibitor. So this is the stuff you can buy commercially. It inhibited 4 out of the 6 fungi, but did not inhibit Cladosporium or Stachybotrys. So this is an example where a research study published something that showed that an essential oil worked better than a commercial mold inhibition product. There you go. Shameless plug, this is one of my online stores, and I'll put a link for this in the description also. And we have a product on here called Metaclay, and Metaclay has bentonite clay in it. And there's another product produced by Results RNA. This is an oral spray. You just spray it in your mouth. And that has zeolite. So it also helps to detoxify. Activated, submicronized, clinoptilolite, zeolite. There's a mouthful. Anyway, if you sign up for my online store or just message me, I can get these products to you. If you sign up for the online store, you can actually just take a screenshot or something of this and look for it. The store actually searches by product name and not ingredient. So if you put in bentonite, you won't find anything. But if you put in Metaclay, Medi-clay, you'll find this. But if you can't find it, just let me know and I'll get it to you. Or you can find it someplace else. That's up to you. But I'm here to help in any way that I can. Anyway, that's longer than I intended, but I hope that you found it informative and useful. I'm going to put a bunch of links in the description below. So check those out if you want further reading. And if you'd like any help getting some of the testing done, please feel free to contact me because that is one of the things that I offer through telemedicine. If you like this content, please give me a thumbs up and click on subscribe if you'd like to see more of it. If there's anything else that you would like me to discuss, drop a message in the comment section. Thank you and have a great day and stay healthy.